Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Trumbore with your nightly review for Tuesday, March 12th. Going to play a little Irish music this week ahead of St. Paddy's Day. The Chieftains. It's 4:01 p.m. Eastern Time, and the Dow Jones is settling up 1 point to 14,004, up 2 points, 14,449, which means it has closed up 8 straight days, another all-time high. However, the S&P finished down 3 points to 1552, so it remained shy of its all-time high, 1565. NASDAQ was down 10. Google was off about 7.75, and Apple down about $9. First, a few notes in Europe. Greece needs to cut 150,000 civil servants by 2015 in order to keep receiving bailout funds. Politically, this is potentially very destabilizing. It has 667,000 civil servants, not including those working for state-run companies like public transport. And Greece hopes to eliminate jobs through attrition, according to Bloomberg. Civil servants have already seen their wages reduced 20%. In the UK, industrial production unexpectedly fell in January 1.2% over December. It had been expected to increase. In France, President Hollande admitted they will miss their target on lowering the budget deficit this year. France's deficit will, without a doubt, he said, be 3.7% of GDP. This comes as France was criticized by a European Central Bank board member, Germany's Jens Wiedemann, who said the reform course in France seems to have floundered. Liz Alderman of the New York Times had a good piece on Italy titled "On the Brink in Italy." Businesses of all sizes have been going belly up at the rate of 1,000 a day over the last year. Especially hard hit are the small and mid-sized companies that represent the backbone of Italy's $2 trillion economy. Economists worry that the pace of business closings may accelerate as long as the country lacks a functioning government. Remember, Parliament gets together on March 15, but I'll get into it maybe tomorrow. There are many problems to come. Kenneth Rogoff, an economist and professor at Harvard, says, quote, "This underscores the likelihood of Italy having a Japan-like decade with phenomenally slow growth, and it raises painful questions about the long-run stability of growth in the Eurozone overall. Italy's political quagmire might not disturb global financial markets right away," Rogoff said, but it raises the specter of the European crisis grinding on, and it would certainly make it harder for European leaders to cut deals on the big picture things that are needed to stabilize Europe. Now, a reason why we have to care about Europe and Italy and just the Eurozone in general is if you're an investor, think about all the U.S. multinationals, for one, that are going to continue to miss earnings on their European operations. Look at Ford. Over the course of months, it raised its estimate of its loss on its European operations for this year from $1 billion to $2 billion. Speaking of dollars, the deadline back in the States for a continuing resolution to fund the government through September 30, of course it's March 27, so 2 weeks from tomorrow. Paul Ryan unveiled his budget today that seeks to balance the books in 10 years, revamping and slashing Medicaid and Medicare, while accepting January's tax hikes on the wealthy and the sequester. The Democrats are unveiling their budget Wednesday, but with no details. White House spokesman Jay Carney said the president has always believed that deficit reduction is not a goal unto itself. The proposals he's put forward keep the number one objective in mind, which is economic growth and job creation, not deficit reduction solely for the purpose of reducing the deficit. House Speaker John Boehner's spokesman Brendan Buck said in response, a balanced budget is something the American people should never expect to see from this president. It's clear that Republicans are the only ones in town with a plan to free our next generation from a growing mountain of debt. So I've noticed, or I've been watching Sean Hannity a few nights recently, and last week he had on Austin Goolsbee, who had been the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors for Obama. And Hannity had all his facts wrong and was arguing with Goolsbee when Goolsbee had the facts. And here are the facts. The deficit is coming down. The economy is getting better. Revenues are starting to come in. I did not see the deficit figure. I forgot to look that up for February, which I think was being released today, this afternoon. But this is what I had up for you weeks ago. And I just want to reiterate. Hannity was getting all over him saying the deficit's not coming down. The facts are that under the CBO's assumptions just released, that the deficit in 2015, fiscal 2015, comes down to $430 billion, as I told you yesterday, but then goes right back up by 2022 to $957 billion. This is mandatory spending, so the lion's share of that is Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. And then the net interest expense on the debt, which is $224 billion for the fiscal year ending September 30, because the debt keeps growing and interest rates will eventually be normalized. The net interest expense is $800 billion in 2022. That's criminal. You think there are going to be some debates over food stamps and Head Start when you're spending $800 billion on interest? So the Republicans have the facts on their side, but they need to be better spokespeople for the facts. Don't distort reality. Hannity had a girl, last night from Breitbart. She was a total idiot. She didn't have the facts, and then it was Hannity is getting all over the Democratic spokesperson. And actually the Democratic spokesperson had the facts. But the facts are we have to stick to a plan and cut entitlements. That's the danger. It's going to be so distorted over the next 2 years unless we tackle it this year. And that's what Paul Ryan knows, and that's what Erskine Bowles knows, and that's what Alan Simpson knows. It's going to be very deceiving, some of the economic numbers, and Americans are going to have this potential feel-good attitude. Douglas Holtz-Eakin, an economist who was CBO director and economic advisor to John McCain, said, "We are letting the legacy programs of the past, the mandatory spending programs, crowd out our ability to do discretionary spending, which is all about the next generation. So we are building a trap to really do a disservice to the next generation." I know most of you know that, but a lot of Americans don't. Okay, North Korea is very important to say the least. Kim Jong-un has been visiting frontline troops, urging them to be on, quote, maximum alert because war could break out any time. On Monday, the North announced it had completely scrapped the 1953 armistice agreement. Some analysts think North Korea will hit the South after joint U.S.-South Korean drills are finished, because you wouldn't think the North would strike when extensive U.S. firepower is in the region for the annual exercises. North Korea also has a history of a military provocation weeks after a presidential inauguration. That's happened every time dating back to 1992. Foster Klug of the Associated Press had a good piece. Today, recent Korean history reveals a sobering possibility. It may only be a matter of time before North Korea launches a sudden deadly attack on the South. And perhaps more unsettling, Seoul has vowed that this time it will respond with an even stronger blow. Lost in the headline-making North Korean bluster about nuclear strikes on Washington in response to UN sanctions is a single sentence in a North Korean Army Supreme Command statement of March 5th. It said, North Korea, quote, will make a strike of justice at any target, any time, as it pleases, without limit. Those words have a chilling link to the recent past. For example, they made threats in 2009 and then followed up by killing 50 South Koreans in 2010 in two separate incidents, the artillery shelling of an island and then the torpedoing of a South Korean vessel. It killed 46 in that case. Gideon Rachman in the Financial Times. Our intercontinental ballistic missiles are on standby. If we push the button, they will blast off and their barrage will turn Washington, the stronghold of American imperialist and the nest of evil, into a sea of fire. That is the kind of rhetoric that you might expect from a Dr. Evil figure in a Hollywood film. Unfortunately, that threat to incinerate Washington was issued just last week by a real person in a real country with real nuclear weapons. No outside power could guarantee the survival of the Kim regime. And anyway, the North Koreans seem to have concluded, following the fall of Libya's Muammar Gaddafi, that it would be suicide to give up their nuclear weapons. Rachman continues, the only thing that could definitively remove the North Korean nuclear threat would be regime change, but the point at which the regime was toppling would also be the moment of maximum danger that it would use nuclear weapons. Faced with so many dangers and dead ends, the Americans and the Chinese need to think together about the most threatening scenarios. The Americans will have contingency plans to try to seize and secure North Korean nuclear weapons in the event of a catastrophic breakdown of order. Perhaps it is time that they discuss those plans with the Chinese and maybe even develop them jointly. The idea of a joint Chinese-American operation to deal with North Korea's nukes sounds like another Hollywood movie, but then again, so does the idea of a North Korean Dr. Evil threatening to incinerate the U.S. Ralph Peters from the New York Post. And he has spotted this exactly, this has been my feeling exactly, this first line, for years. Like others, I have dismissed past North Korean threats as pathetic pleas for attention, but things have begun to feel different. My greatest concern is that Kim Jong-un, a pampered, sheltered young man, may not have a grip on reality. He may not know how hollow his own regime has become or how limited his strategic reach truly is. It's all too possible that yes-man generals concerned for their own privileges may have exaggerated North Korea's military and nuclear capabilities to their young leader. He may actually believe he could strike America and that his large but decrepit army is invulnerable. Back on February 23rd, I wrote in my Week in Review, I quoted Choi Yin-wook, a senior researcher at the Korea Institute for Unification Studies. He said that as far as the South Korean public was concerned, this was a time for punishment, though this was a game that could prove dangerous. Kim Jong-un is much more aggressive than his father. He thinks he can be more provocative. He is not worried about retaliation. He implied that he might do another nuclear test, and I think he is not just bluffing. He is ready to play a totally new game because he sees this as North Korea's final gamble. Well, the latest on China, switching gears, and the number of dead pigs from the Songyang section of the Huangpu River is now about 6,000, according to the Shanghai government. The Huangpu River cuts through the center of China's financial hub, so imagine how lovely that is. The government needs to better enforce laws governing the disposal of dead pigs and reporting of outbreaks to discourage farmers from their habit of discarding the animals in ditches and rivers. Oh, those daffy Chinese. Well, two notes from this week in baseball, this day in baseball, two tragic events. March 12, 1907, former St. Louis Browns pitcher and outfielder Pat Hines, now with Milwaukee, of the American Association, is shot to death by a bartender on his 23rd birthday in a saloon near his St. Louis home. And in 1930, March 12, 1930, Reginald Jack Powell, who pitched in 2 games for the Browns in 1913, chokes to death in a Memphis, Tennessee restaurant after betting that he can eat an entire steak in one gulp. That's all for tonight. I'll be back with you tomorrow, Wednesday. Keep the men and women of our armed forces in your thoughts and prayers, and we pray for the families of the 5 victims of the Black Hawk helicopter crash in Afghanistan today. It seems like bad weather might have been the cause, not enemy fire, but you never know. Take care.